Good day, dear ALESBA participants. This is a summarized version of ALESBA Phase 3. I hope it assists you in your learning and is a snapshot of Phase 3 that you can use in your own work. I'm going to go through the slides one by one, but please also refer to your ALESBA booklet for more information on the topic and the different tools that you can use. So here goes, ALESBA Phase 3, Alternatives Analysis and Design. When we come to Phase 3, we are starting to move to the realm of educational planning. The scope of education systems widened, and this has been written into different documents. The current World Bank Education Strategy referred to that and says that education systems should include the full range of learning opportunities available in a country. That means the formal, the informal, whether it's financed or provided by public or private sectors, the NGOs, government. It should include the full range of beneficiaries and stakeholders and should also look at rules, policies, accountability mechanisms that bind an education system together. When stakeholders look at redesigning their systems, they have to look at different options. For example, what will be the role of the state? What will be the role of other stakeholders? What will be the contents of the program? Is their other program looking at literacy only, at livelihood skills, a combination? What is the focus? They have to look at the choice of language, the types of materials that will be used, how facilitators will be trained, who will be the supervisors, what kind of monitoring and evaluation system. Until now, the variety of systems, programs, and approaches developed in different countries have produced different results, and we have learned that no single solution will suit the variety of human situations and the demands from diverse target groups. We think that the conceptual framework with the system elements and building blocks of the ALESBA can provide an organized and systematic framework and process for all the many decisions and design options that are out there for stakeholders. So let's have a look at how far we have come. Standing on a platform of consensus building, let's see how we have moved through the ALESBA phases. Until now, what we hope in an ideal world we would have achieved is that in Phase 1, the relationships between ALESBA partners would have been reconsidered, clarified, and defined according to their mandates and functions. That there is overwhelming agreement on the defined scope of the ALE system that needs improvement or strengthening to address service delivery challenges. That there is agreement that the ALESBA will be used as an approach to guide system building in the country, and that the preliminary vision for the ALE system is defined, even though we can revise it later. That's for Phase 1. For Phase 2, after system assessments, hopefully there's an in-depth understanding of the target group's needs and interests, and their perceptions of the current ALE services as documented in demands, assessments, evaluations that we may have done, etc. And therefore that we will have baseline data on the status of each system building block and element in the existing system. Looking from the supply side, and we also have the scoring results. So both the demand and supply side would have been covered. And that we will have insights into the root causes of system blockages. So those would be some of the ideal outcomes of Phase 2. Moving then to Phase 3, so the results from Phase 1 and Phase 2 feed into Phase 3, and don't forget Phase 1 consensus building is an ongoing process. So in Phase 3 we look at four main steps in the process. Step 1, we look at the assessment and the diagnosis results from Phase 2, and we are trying to find the best entry points to change and improve the system. So step 1, find the best entry points to change and improve the system. What do we mean? Entry points is system building blocks that need improvement, but also have the potential to provide leverage to change other system building blocks. And we have to prioritize which building blocks have the biggest need for change or can provide the most leverage. We have to look at factors such as costs, time, etc., because we cannot always address all the system building blocks at once. Once we know what our entry points are, we have to consider and compare different means or modalities to redesign these prioritized system building blocks or even a whole element. From there, we can move to step 3, where we will assess the impact of those changes that we want to make in step 2, in the prioritized building blocks, on the system as a whole, because a change in one building block will definitely have an impact on other building blocks. Remember, we are using a system approach and we are working with the adult education system. So we have to assess the impact on other blocks as well. And they may need adjustment then as well. So that finally we can consolidate our whole redesign of the different system building blocks across the elements into a cohesive system design response framework. This is a document that will describe how the new system will look and how it is expected to function, and also the processes that we will use to activate these systems changes. How will we go about it so that we are prepared for phase 4, where we will implement and test this new system. So these are the 4 steps in phase 3. You can also look at it in this flow diagram. Maybe that's an easier way to look at it. So when you look at step 1, find and prioritize the best entry points to improve the system. Step 1 has some sub-steps. We will first have to look at aligning the demand and the supply side. We will have to rank the existing services, then define and prioritize which ALE services do we have to offer, and therefore which building blocks are so weak that will affect these services that we want to offer. Once we've done that, we can move to step 2, which is, as I said, is considering alternatives for the redesign of these building blocks. And here we have 3 activities. Once again, search the alternatives, weigh them against criteria, and make a decision, so that we can look at step 3, assess the impact of the redesign on the whole system. And here we look at which building blocks are affected, how can we improve these blocks as well. And like in step 2, we will weigh alternatives. We will repeat those steps. And finally, in step 4, consolidate this in a consolidated system design response framework. And throughout of all of this, and especially towards the end, we have to consider the roles and responsibilities of stakeholders, so that each stakeholder is clear on their role and mandates. So these are the 4 steps. Therefore, let's look at each step now one by one. When we come to before that, let's be sure of the whole process of alternatives analysis and decision making. Alternatives analysis is often described as a systematic way of searching for and finding solutions. It follows a problem analysis, and it's a prerequisite to design action strategies and new systems. Alternatives can be analyzed as a different means to reach a prior end, and there are usually 3 steps in alternatives analysis. We search for alternatives. What choices do we have? What is out there? We weigh them against selected criteria and decide on alternatives to be pursued. The selection of alternatives are better when we have an understanding of the problem, so we are clear what the problems are. We have a clear vision of where we want to go. And the criteria to make the decision is transparent to all involved. Please consider the following. We try to make what already exists work better. We want to find answers within the existing system. We must avoid to find external solutions that may not consider local variables. Remember, form follows function. We are always naturally eager to change structures, but we don't always look at the functions before we do that. We must find leverage points that will accelerate system changes across many building blocks, because that can also be cost effective. And throughout the whole process, don't forget the impact of system dynamics. A change in one may affect change in other things. Now finally, let's look at each of the 4 steps one by one. So to facilitate phase 3, let's look at step 1, which is find and prioritizing the entry points to improve the system. So the flow diagram is trying to give you an idea of how the process will flow, and it also, if you look at the build typing. Those are the 4 sub-activities or sub-steps in step 1, and I'll recap them again. But first of all, if we want to find entry points to improve the system, we have to ask ourselves, does the ALE system provide the type of services the ALE users need and are interested in? We are trying to align our demand and supply side here. If we say yes on the left, yes, the current types of services available address all the expressed needs and interests of existing and potential new ALE service users, then we don't have many challenges. But if we say no, or only partially, only selected services are relevant, there may be new services needed. We have to use the information of both of these to come to the point where we then also ask, even the existing services, are they accessible, affordable? Do they provide high quality services? Are they covering the whole country, all the target group that needs them? And we can use a ranking exercise to determine whether our existing services actually do that. So we will now sit with 2 key pieces of information. The one is, how do people perceive existing services when we use this ranking exercise? But then also, if there are new services that the target group want, those also have to be entertained. So among all of this, how do we come to a point where we define and prioritize the services that will be offered by the ALE system? Decisions have to be made, and we will have to look once again at criteria to help us to make those decisions, because we may not have the funding to do all of that at once. And then we move to, can the supply side offer these services? And even if we've decided which ones we are going to offer, can our system, our current system, offer this? Which building blocks are weak, or which elements can be entry points for system improvement? And here we will go back and refer to the ALESBA scores, cause and effect diagrams, process maps from phase 2, that will tell us where the weaknesses in our system are at the moment, and therefore how will that affect these services that we want to offer, new services or existing services that we want to improve or upscale to a bigger part of the country or a region. Finally, we will prioritize the system building blocks or elements that need immediate attention and or can provide leverage for other changes, so that we can go ahead to design an improved system. So these are, and move to step 2. So these are the sub-activities in step 1, and I hope the flow diagram assists you to understand that better. So if we summarize, what do we do in step 1? We align the demand and supply side, and this tool from the previous slide is on page 17 in your booklet. So if the current system does not address the target group's needs, we have to redesign, because the system will be obsolete. Therefore, what services should be offered? And can the supply side offer these services, or to what extent can it offer? Don't forget, there might be demands for new services. So, second sub-step, are the existing aligned services accessible to learners of high quality, etc.? The ranking tool can be used to determine that. Once we know these, we can define and prioritize the types of services that will be offered by the ALE system. Remember, this is now what we take forward into the design of a new system to offer these services. So once we know what the demand side wants in the sub-step 3, we start to look again back to the supply side. What are the weakest building blocks or elements, and which ones are we targeting as entry points to improve the system to deliver these services we've decided upon? And since we can't do all at once, how will we prioritize the system building blocks that we can start with, or the ones that can give us the most leverage? I hope this makes sense to all of you participants as we go along. I will just do a few tools of each of these sub-activities. We said the first one was aligning the demand and supply side, and this is just a visual way of looking at it and determining which ones are aligned, which ones are new. For example, the yellow blocks show new ones, and this is just an easy visual way. And course participants, you already did an assignment on this, and it already proven to be very useful and gave us a lot of insight of especially new non-formal kind of skills that our learners are interested in. When it comes to ranking ALE services against criteria, we look at how do the ALE service users perceive these existing services. How can we find out what are their perceptions? And in phase 4, there's a lovely tool called Community Scorecards, which can be part of your day-to-day M&E system within the ALESBA or in any service delivery optimization to assess how your target group feel about the services. And we usually try to rank the services irrespective of the stakeholders that provide the service. We rather use the results from the demand and supply side, because we want to have a perception of services as a whole. We have to rank, if we want to use the community scorecards, we rank the service by the users, but also the stakeholders, because they are the ones that often, the ones who deliver the service are often the ones that have challenges. And when we rank services, we have to keep in mind new versus existing services. And I will share an example, but in phase 4, we will go into this scoring tool into more depth. That will give you more information. But for current purposes, have a look at this. For example, if we look at adult literacy, non-formal skills training, business skill training, and we want to rank those services against criteria such as accessibility to the target group, acceptability, do they find it useful, what is the quality of service, and to what extent is it covered. And if we do it on a score of 1 to 5, you can see the scores that come out. So you can take this tool and use it for your own purposes, change the kind of services, change the criteria you want to use. But it's a tool that can help you to determine how do your service users view the services. So you will do this ranking with ALE learners, the target group. But as I mentioned, you can also use it with stakeholders. And so when we look at, if you want to interpret some of the scores and how do we rank finally, you can maybe see in the example that the interest in business skills and non-formal skills training is higher than literacy. Remember, this is just an example and it will fall out maybe different with your target group, but this may imply a better perception or interest by users. You can interpret each cell score in rank. I will not go into detail with this, but this gives you an idea, and you can also read through the slides together with this presentation. So when we come to the second sub-step of step 1, I'm sorry if that is so confusing. Please refer to your booklets for the diagrams. We want to define and prioritize the types of services that we will now offer. Remember, we are using the information from our target group, how they feel about the existing services based on this ranking, the matrix that we've done. And also maybe through interviews, they may have indicated new types of services that they are interested in. So we use the information from the alignment exercise we've already done, the service ranking, other former system assessments that we've done. If you've done evaluations in your projects, all of that would have given you information to decide in this country or in our area, what are the kind of services that we will offer through our ALE system. And this may require our existing stakeholders to improve or even expand their service delivery, but it also may require new sectors or stakeholders to have to come on board, especially if there are new types of services that the target group require. So it might ask us to cooperate with new stakeholders, form new partnerships, and shift our own working modalities a little bit. We have to think about the resources we have available, because we might not be able to offer everything the target group asks. But we also have to consider policies, strategies, and plans at macro level in the enabling environment that may dictate service delivery and therefore also budget flow. So keep all of these things in mind when you make the decisions about the types of services that the system will offer. Please, colleagues, remember this can also happen over time. You may decide for the next 3 years you will offer these services. At a later stage, you will offer additional services. Rome was not built in a day. When you define and prioritize, also think that stakeholders can rank existing and potential new services against criteria such as, this will help you maybe to make a decision. You can rank these services against criteria such as the high demand for service from the learners. What is the priority of the services in policy, strategies, national development plans, budgets? What's the costs or affordability of introducing these new services? What's the stakeholders and sectors' commitment to deliver the service? What's the feasibility of the type of system changes required? Can we make those changes or not? So you can use alternatives matrix with scores or weights to rank using criteria such as these to make a final decision on the services. This means you will put this type of criteria on the left-hand side, and then all the services you are thinking to offer or that the target group demanded on the top, and you will look at how and ranking it and see what falls out. And as I mentioned, you can use a phased approach to say first 3 to 5 years this, then later you introduce more services as the system expands and funding become available. Then the next sub-step is, once you now know what you are going to offer, how do you identify the weakest building blocks or elements that may affect the service delivery? And this will be your entry point for system improvement. I hope you can see by now, we started from the demand side. We started to find out what does our target group want, and therefore what will we ultimately offer. Until now, our first sub-steps of step 1 looked at that. We are still busy trying to find an entry point to improve the system. So from the demand side, we now know. Let us then now look at our supply side. Which building blocks, and we know from our system assessment in phase 2 which ones are weak. Which of these building blocks will hamper either improvement of the quality or even adding new services to the ALE system? We've decided upon the service. Can the existing system offer these services? We refer back to the supply side assessment and scores of phase 2. Which building blocks and elements were weak when we did those studies? We can compare the scores, but also look at the detailed narrative details of our reports when we did peer reviews or any other form of evaluation of the system. We look at the diagnosis we've done on the root causes, because remember, if we address the root causes, we can have leverage across a number of system building blocks. So which system building blocks should therefore be prioritized for system strengthening? Will this solve the current service delivery problem? How? Which building blocks can provide leverage? If we improve that block, can many other blocks benefit from that? And what will be required to include new services? There might be other building blocks that need attention for this. It's important that all of this happens as a participatory, transparent process with all involved stakeholders. And finally, from all of that, how do we finally now prioritize the building blocks that need attention? So this is the last part of step 1. We have to focus on the ALE services to be delivered. Which building blocks can help us to roll those out? Which ones have leverage? Keep in mind the system challenges, the time and cost to address the weakest building block. Don't forget, we introduce all these changes in a still functioning system. We cannot switch the existing system off. So we also have to look at our interim and long-term strategies. Are there any quick wins, things that we can do that can already address the target group's need or even bring in more funding? We have to use tools to assist us in decision making, because this really makes for a more analytical process. And these kind of tools is the cross-impact matrix, which is very useful to explore relationships, impact, and leverage that building blocks can have on one another, especially when we want to prioritize building blocks. This is a very useful tool to look at, and you can complete it per system building block or element. In the example in the next slide, I've done a comparison of the impact of the enabling environment on technical processes. So all the building blocks in those two elements are compared with each other. How did we do that? By consistently asking one question. What is the impact, for example, what is the impact of the effective functioning of building block X on the effective functioning on building block Y? For example, what is the impact of an effective policy in place to ensure that relevant localized curricula is designed and applied? Can you see I took the impact of a building block in the enabling environment element on a building block in the technical processes. And I've used scores where 1 means a limited impact and 5 means a high impact. And in that way, I continue to score all the elements and building blocks within these two, enabling environment and technical processes. And then I have results, and you can use then on top of that, you can use alternatives analysis as another tool to refine this decision. So just for example purposes, on the top is the 5 building blocks of the enabling environment, and on the left the building blocks of the technical processes. And remember the consistent question: what is the impact of policy on localized curricula, on program design, on capacity development, etc.? Then again, what is the impact of strategy on each of these? And through that you will get a score. If you don't want to use scores, you can also write your summarized statements on each of these. And I hope this tool, if you use it across all the elements, will assist you to see the impact of different building blocks. And this helps a lot to find leverage and entry points, to see if I do this, look the impact on multiple building blocks. And start with pre-selected. You can then take it further if you want to do on top of the cross impact matrix. You can use the alternatives analysis matrix. You will start with the pre-selected building blocks. So what the cross impact matrix throws out as the best building blocks as entry points, you can use them, and you can then further refine your decision with agreed upon criteria, again using a score of 1 to 5. And that means, for example, if from the cross impact matrix you saw that capacity development, AL policy and implementation structures of your system and budgeting are the main building blocks where you have to start to improve the system, these are your entry point building blocks, then you can still use the criteria. For example, time needed to improve this building block, the costs to make the changes, the leverage on other building blocks, the direct impact on service delivery. And you can score to see which building blocks score the best. And these two tools used as a combination can give you a very good idea on what your entry points for system improvement will be. Remember, these building blocks are still the building blocks that we are thinking about based on the services we want to deliver. So don't forget the demand side. So that, all of that until now is just the sub-activities of step 1. Step 1 is quite comprehensive because finding the right entry point and prioritizing the building blocks that need attention should be an intensive exercise, because if you address the wrong building blocks, you will waste time, you will waste money, and your system will not improve. So if you are convinced you have prioritized the best building blocks to deliver the services you've decided upon, you've already come a long way. So now you know which are the building blocks you want to improve. And the second question in step 2 then comes, how will you improve these building blocks? So step 2 of phase 3, consider alternatives for the redesign of these prioritized building blocks elements. I hope you are keeping track of all these many steps, dear participants. So step 2, consider alternatives for the redesign of the prioritized building blocks elements. Step 1 would have told us by the end of step 1 which are the prioritized building blocks. So what happens in step 2? We look at the outcomes of step 1. The outcomes of step 1 would have given us a list of prioritized building blocks that need to be improved or redesigned to ensure the system functions well. And we will look at both the immediate and long-term actions to address these building blocks. Some building blocks, like a policy or a strategy, might take many years, so we have to keep that in mind. So step 2 of phase 3 is looking at the actual redesign or improvement of prioritized building blocks. And that's actually quite exciting because you now have an opportunity to look at different ways to improve these system building blocks. So it's all about the way, the means, the modality of how a building block looks or function. So addressing the design of a building block, for example, if you just want to look at curricula, how will you redesign it? If it's currently a top-down, non-participatory type of approach, do you want to make it more decentralized? How will you include more stakeholders in the process? There are different ways for you to redesign the system building block. And ALESBA stakeholders should consider different design options. So our activities for step 2 is about brainstorming among stakeholders, researching, finding different design options for each prioritized system building block. At the end of your booklet of phase 3, there are some examples as well. But most of the time, ALESBA stakeholders already have a lot of good ideas from your own experience, from projects that you've implemented, from pilot projects that you may have learned, from evaluation studies that I've done, from research that universities have done, from literature, international literature, sharing between countries. There's a lot of information about what works and what doesn't work. So we have to tap into these resources, starting from our own, and see what options do we have. We will weigh these design options against selected criteria, again using tools such as the alternative matrices, and finally decide on the best alternative option to redesign each of these prioritized system building blocks. So these are 3 main sub-activities in step 2. Please keep in mind all the time while you are busy with this, the focus should stay on the needs and interests of the ALE target group. What is the vision for the ALE system? Keeping in mind how to balance the demand and the supply side of the system. Consider options that can impact positively on the full system, all the building blocks. Draw from the experiences of all stakeholders. Conduct research if needed. Focus on multi-sector and integrated services. Consider your country's governance system. So how will that affect the rollout of this new design that you have in mind? Redesign the system before focusing on the roles of stakeholders. Remember, form follows function. First, look at how will this new system roll out services to the target group. Then we will step back and look at the roles of stakeholders. And towards the end of this presentation, I will unpack that more. Make sure you look at realistic and achievable and cost-effective options. And right through think about service delivery optimization. How do we reach more people with better quality services? So I mentioned again and again, use the tools such as the alternative analysis to decide on your design options. There's just once again an example. Remember that agreeing on the criteria in these tools is as important as the options, because the criteria will ultimately determine what will be thrown out as the best option. You can use scores and concluding statement, complete and decide on each prioritized system building block. So the 3 main tools that we've used a lot until now is the service ranking, the cross-impact matrix, and the alternatives analysis matrix, which can be used throughout in different ways. Make sure you document the process and outcomes throughout. That brings us, we are almost towards the end, that brings us to step 3. Assess the impact of the redesign on the whole system. Now in step 1, you found the best entry points to improve the system with the services you've decided the system will deliver. Step 2, you looked at how will you redesign the building blocks that need attention to deliver that service. Now you look at if we change, if we improve those system building blocks that badly needs improvement to deliver services, will we not maybe impact on other building blocks? So things may go wrong because now this building block works in a certain way and the other building blocks still work in the old way. So what's the impact of this redesign we have in mind on the whole system and the building blocks that we've not changed? So we will look at different tools that you can use. There's process map, objectives trees, and scenario sketching. And I'm just briefly going to say how you can use these. So if you use a process map, and there's very nice examples in pages 29 and 30, as well as the appendices of your booklet. But a process map indicates the flow of the system across all elements and building blocks to deliver services. So it will literally show the flow and how the building blocks work together up to the point of impact where the services reach the target group, the interface. So you can use process map to test the flow of service delivery with your newly designed system to see if we design the system in a certain way, will it still flow, or will we have new blockages or challenges that will hinder services reaching the target group? So it's a very nice way to test the flow of your newly designed system. Likewise with objective trees, you will recall we did problem trees in phase 2 to find out the root causes of our system challenges. If you convert these problem trees into objective trees by making every problem statement an objective statement, and you now look whether your newly designed building blocks will facilitate the objectives and flow of services as per the objectives tree, once again you will have a good idea what can work and what may not work. Scenario sketching is similar. You can sketch different scenarios based on the new system design and debate how the system could function, what challenges may still be hindering service delivery, and debate whether different options will eliminate these occurring blockages and challenges. So these are all different tools to help you to test whether your new redesign will work. Will it really flow through to the point of service delivery? So that's step 3. And ultimately, after all the hard work of steps 1, 2, and 3, you come to step 4, where you consolidate this new redesign of your system into a cohesive, we call it the ALE system design response framework. You are welcome to call it something else. But why response framework? Because it is a document that you want to take into phase 4 of the ALESBA. Phase 4 is about implementing and testing your newly designed system. So you need to document not only the outcomes and the final decisions, but also the processes very well. And even activities from phases 1 and phases 2 can be captured as appendices in this document. So we say the new design should be captured into a comprehensive document for phase 4, which is about implementing and testing this new system. You also now have an opportunity to revisit the vision and the goals for the ALE system that you did in phase 1 after you've done the redesign in phase 3. Are you still happy with that vision that you did in phase 1 consensus building during one of your stakeholder workshops? So let's look at the kind of things that we will write into this document. Obviously, you will need a small executive summary. You will have an introduction. You can have a background where you can capture some of the things that happened in phase 1 and phase 2 and refer to appendices. For example, the results of the system assessment with a peer review, the demand side assessment. All of this background information should be there. The new vision with any underlying driving principles for that vision. You can do a summary of all the ALE system challenges identified during phase 2, and then now you bring it into how does that feed into the entry points for the ALE system improvement. So all the work you've done in step 1 of phase 3 can be captured under the entry points for the ALE system improvement. This will say what you finally decided. And then which system elements are you redesigning? What will be the stakeholders' roles and responsibilities? So redesigned system elements, you will explain exactly how that system element and building blocks under that specific element will now look and function in detail. And coming then to what is the stakeholders' roles and responsibilities in this new design. And what is the operational plan for implementing this design? And you will see this is the connecting point with phase 4. When we start with phase 4, this operational plan for implementation of the new system is exactly where phases 3 and 4 meet. And then now have a conclusion and of course a number of annexes. When it comes to, you cannot end phase 3 without assigning roles to the stakeholders for the next phases of system building. Hopefully all stakeholders have been on board with phases 1, phases 2, and especially phase 3, and have made contributions of all their ideas and expertise. But keep in mind that the redesign may affect roles and mandates and responsibilities, because the new system might actually call on stakeholders to fulfill their mandates, or there may be new stakeholders that deliver new services. How do you bring them in? So keep these things in mind. Consider vertical structures and relationships. That means your governance systems in the country. How does service delivery flow from national to regional, provincial, to district and local levels? What are the relationships, the communication channels, and how do different sectors, government sectors, work across those structures? But also, how do other partners flow with the working relationship across those structures? Secondly, think about horizontal structures and multi-sectoral integration. This is about thinking across sectors. If you have ALE services that look at literacy, that looks at business skills training, that looks at non-formal livelihood skills training, how do you integrate these services, or where is the touching point? So horizontally, how will different stakeholders work together to deliver these services? Keep in mind, we are also different types of stakeholders. So what will be the coordination responsibilities between different types of stakeholders, such as government, NGOs, universities, etc.? How will we use different tools to facilitate this processes of redesign? We've mentioned so many, but you can also look, when it comes to stakeholders, you can look at tools such as stakeholders participation matrix and force field analysis. Please see pages 41 to 44 in the booklet. There are detailed examples with steps how you can use these two tools to make sure stakeholders feel they have a role and they know where they fit into this process. And then in summary and conclusion, there are your 4 steps of phase 3. Step 1, find and prioritize the best entry points to improve the system. Step 2, consider alternatives for the redesign of the prioritized system building blocks. Step 3, assess the impact of the redesign on the whole system. Step 4, consolidate the redesign into a response framework. And then in the second column, you can see the outcomes, decisions that you have to reach within each of these steps, and the processes and tools that we've talked about that you can use. So this is just a summary table. And then don't forget, last but not least, the whole issue of assigning roles to stakeholders for the next phases. So I come to a conclusion. Please refer to all the ALESBA booklets, not only on phase 3, but phases 1 and 2. The summarized presentation cannot cover all the contents and tools in depth, but I hope it will give you a snapshot and that you can adapt and adjust it to your own context. See pages 34 to 40 in the phase 3 booklet for an elaboration on design options. And in the webinar on round 2, we will definitely also look at how we can explore more design options. I know in your assignments, the issue of non-formal vocational training came out a lot, and we will pick up on those topics. Use different participatory and visual tools when you facilitate these processes. And remember, each country moves at its own pace through the phases. And these phases are not, you can never say you are fully done. You may go back to certain activities in phase 2. You may go back to activities in phase 3 while you are in phase 4. The ALESBA is a compass to guide your existing ALE system building process. I really look forward to seeing you in round 3 of the ALESBA training, and round 3 will focus on phase 4, where we look at how can you implement and test a new design. And even though I presented phase 3 as a very comprehensive redesign of our whole system, we often redesign our systems in smaller sections. We may redesign a certain component, or we might already implement and test certain components of our system, for example, CLC structures. So phase 4 will tap into that and look at flow then to phase 5, where we will look at reviewing, adjusting, and upscaling a system. And this is also very important, whether it's your whole system or just a section. So, dear colleagues, I hope this helped you, and the slides will also be available with your booklets, and feel free at any time to contact me or any other expert if you need more help to contextualize this to your own country context. Thank you very much.